Order, order. Question the President of COP26. I call Fleur Anderson.
Question number 1 to the Minister, please.
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 1 and 2 together. The Prime Minister's 10-point plan sets out our blueprint for a green industrial revolution, a plan to invest in green technologies and industries, leveraging in billions of pounds of private sector investment, supporting up to 250,000 green jobs and levelling up across the UK. It's a clear plan to build back greener from the COVID pandemic.
I think it's grouped as well. Grouped. 1 and 2's grouped. Yeah. OK. Yeah. Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK's credibility as COP President rests on demonstrable climate action at home. The government has set legally binding net zero targets, but is currently off track to meet its 4th and 5th carbon budgets, which are calibrated for previous, more lenient targets. Scrapping the Green Homes grant 2 weeks ago puts us into reverse. How will the Secretary of State seek to progress local, national and international progress on energy efficiency and specifically on green homes in the run-up to and during COP26?
President.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the Honourable Lady that, of course, the UK has decarbonised its economy faster than any other G20 nation since the year 2000. We've met CB1, CB2, we're on track to meet CB3, and of course, we are pursuing plans to ensure that we meet CB4 and 5. And ahead of COP26, we will publish a comprehensive net zero strategy.
Let's go to Andrew Gwynn. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has talked confidently about British leadership, but the Prime Minister's 10-point plan is full of big words but no real detail, and a total impact by the government's own admission that it will not meet the 4th and 5th carbon budgets. When you pull back the curtain, there's not much to look at and we're running out of time. He's just said in answer to my honourable friend that there will be a net zero strategy. We need it before the summer recess to make the government's word credible ahead of COP26. Does he agree with that? And if so, what's he doing about it?
President Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, as someone who is partly responsible for preparing the 10-point plan, could I suggest he actually read the detail of it? I've also discussed it in terms of the sector-specific points that are in there with individuals within different sectors of industry who have found it quite compelling. Of course, I agree with him that we need to be doing more, and that is why I have committed that we will publish the comprehensive net strategy ahead of COP26.
Let's go to Philip Dunn. Philip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What steps is my right honourable friend taking in his extensive discussions with leaders around the world in making progress at COP26 to develop a global standard or taxonomy of climate change impact in both financial reporting and in green labelling investment products?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend will know, the UK has taken a leading role in climate-related disclosures by implementing a green taxonomy and, of course, very importantly, making TCFD-aligned disclosures mandatory across the economy by 2025. In the conversations that I have with governments around the world, I'm urging other countries to follow a similar approach on financial disclosures. And when he talks about asset owners in the financial service sector, we are also encouraging asset owners and asset managers to make net zero commitments.
Substantive question to COP President.
Mr. Speaker, when the UK took on the role of the incoming COP26 presidency, under 30% of the global economy was covered by a net zero commitment. The good news is that figure has now increased to 70%, and of course I'm pressing all countries to come forward with net zero commitments. However, as colleagues in this House have acknowledged previously, the UNFCCC's initial NDC synthesis report published in February showed that we have much more progress to make in terms of 2030 emissions reduction targets, and I'm pressing countries on those as well.
Let's go to Ruth Edwards. Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is a global leader in protecting the ocean, as shown by the success of its Blue Belt and 30 by 30 programmes. But as my right honourable friend will know, only 1% of international waters currently have effective protection. Will he commit the UK to take the lead in pushing for a strong global oceans treaty at the UN to establish an international framework for protecting marine biodiversity in international waters?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises an incredibly vital issue, and so she'll be pleased to hear that the UK is working hard to see negotiations concluded this year on a new UN Convention for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdictions, and this will of course enable the establishment of marine protected areas and help to deliver on that 30 by 30 target.
Shadow Minister Matthew Pennycook.
The UNFCCC parties this week, the President rightly argued that we must halve global emissions by 2030 if we're to keep the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees within reach. Yet he will know that recent UN analysis makes clear that current national pledges will reduce emissions by just 1% by the end of this critical decade. We need the major emitters to do much more if we're to close the gap. That means deep cuts in American emissions and for Chinese emissions to peak by 2025, but it also means tangible progress on the part of India. With the Prime Minister meeting President Modi later this month, could the COP President tell the House what the UK is willing to put on the table, particularly in terms of climate finance and technological support, to help ensure India feels able to markedly increase its ambition ahead of the summit?
President.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree entirely with the honourable gentleman that, of course, all countries need to make much more progress when it comes to ambitious nationally determined contributions. There's 2030 near-term emission reductions targets. I have spoken with large economies around the world. As he knows, I met with President Modi a few weeks ago, and of course, we are working on a number of initiatives with the Indian government. When the Prime Minister does indeed go to India, I'm sure there will be further announcements.
We have another substantive question. President.
Mr. Speaker, we are working very hard to ensure that we deliver an in-person COP which allows all countries to participate on an equal footing. This is incredibly important as many parties feel strongly that negotiations must be in person. We continue to explore how technology and other innovations can make the summit more resilient, safe and inclusive.
Let's go to Martin Day. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for that answer. Many respondents, both academics and former COP attendees to the Beige Committee's survey of expert views, highlighted the important value of remote participation for otherwise excluded groups and for reducing the carbon footprint on the conference. So will the President explore the possibilities of wider virtual participation in COP in addition to the physical attendance at the conference?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raises an incredibly important point. I've said on a number of occasions that I want this to be the most inclusive COP ever, and absolutely we are looking at how we can expand digital programmes to allow for more virtualisation, and I hope at the appropriate time I'll be able to update the House further.
Darren Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's reported in the papers today that a diplomatic source from the British government says, and I quote, "No one in Europe thinks it's going to happen, and the US is increasingly sceptical it can happen without delay." I support the COP President's aims for a physical conference of national delegations, but of course many stakeholders are politicians, business leaders, NGOs and others. When will the Cabinet Office produce the contingency plans to give clarity to stakeholders about how engagement can take place in November?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman again raises an incredibly important point. He will have seen the letter I've written to the UNFCCC members as well in terms of progress we want to make over the coming months. I would just say to him that COP26 has already been postponed by 1 year and the urgency of the climate crisis has not abated. I don't sense any desire amongst parties for a further postponement, and we're working very hard to ensure that we have an in-person physical COP, taking into account, of course, any COVID-related contingencies.
A substantive question. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a new title. I was happy with International Champion, but I'm sure Vice Presidency would be acceptable too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The actions we're taking to tackle climate change support the delivery of a range of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Through the Together for Our Planet campaign and the Race to Zero, we are encouraging towns, cities and communities to drive climate action at a local level. This is supported by the COP26 UK Mayors and Regional Advisory Council, which includes West Yorkshire Combined Authority and Kirklees Council, and they have set themselves an ambitious target of being net zero by 2038.
Let's go to Barry Sherman. Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But with the Minister and certainly the Secretary of State, who I have great confidence in, will he ensure that what we're doing in Huddersfield, with making Huddersfield a sustainable town and a sustainable community by rigorously pursuing the Sustainable Development Goals. We are building a network of towns across the United Kingdom. We're up to about 20. We need to get to 50 and 500. What can the government help us do this? Because it's the one way of grassrooting and making sure that COP26 is not COP-out 26.
I thank the honourable member for his question. I think it's so important that we encourage and indeed provide the tools, and the Together for Our Planet campaign is one of those, to help our constituents, our towns and our cities, to really understand and take charge for themselves of the impact they can have in helping meet our Paris Agreement challenge, and that involves everything from household choices through to changes in how we run our buses and trains, and every council and every community has a role to play in that.
Kim Johnson.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues about decarbonisation. My right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, is putting a green recovery for transport at the centre of his department's decision-making in the run-up to COP26 and beyond.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you for your answer. Liverpool City Region are developing a project to bring 20 hydrogen-powered double-decker buses to the streets, and the potential for further green investment to scale this up and achieve our ambition of being net zero carbon by 2040. Can the Minister explain when the £30 billion in-planned capital investment as part of the green recovery stimulus will be available to support our ambition? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will ensure that the specific point she's raised is taken up with my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary. What I would say to her is that she will know that last month the Transport Secretary launched a multi-million-pound scheme to enable local authorities to roll out zero-emission buses, and this funding is going to deliver 500 zero-emission buses, supporting the government's wider commitment to introduce 4,000 such vehicles.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Deirdre Brock. Deirdre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's no joined-up thinking on any issue with this government, but we would all have hoped for some cross-department thinking on this issue at least. We are, as usual, disappointed with even the Green Homes grant gone after just a few months. So much for building back better. There's increasing concern voiced internationally too about the UK government's lack of progress domestically on environmental commitments. So will he show some real leadership then and commit today to start seriously lobbying his government colleagues to join up the dots and start delivering, so we can look forward to environmentally sound investment, renewed support for a comprehensive charging framework for electric vehicles, real investment in hydrogen technology and marine energy, support for housing improvements, and so on? Will he do that, or is he happy to leave us all embarrassed to be hosting COP26 while the UK seems to be striding off in the opposite direction?
Speaker, I'd just say to the Honourable Lady that the role of the COP presidency is to ensure that we are working with all 197 parties to ensure that we are making progress on keeping the 1.5 degrees within reach. Of course, the UK, like any other country, needs to see what more we can do. But I would just say I hope she will acknowledge that we are seen as a leader in the world. And indeed, since 2000, as I said, we've decarbonised our economy faster than any other G20 nation.
Tamanjeet and Desi.
Number 11, please, Mr. Speaker.
Climate change and biodiversity loss are inextricably linked. That's why the UK has made nature a core priority of our COP26 presidency. We pioneered and launched the Leaders' Pledge for Nature in September last year, and we are also driving global action to protect and restore critical ecosystems like forests and accelerating a transition towards sustainable agriculture, whilst mobilising the finance to support this.
Speaker, in order to tackle biodiversity loss, the Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15 in May, will support new targets on nature. However, with the environmental bill delayed yet again, how will the Minister ensure that the outcomes from this conference will feed into the COP26 in November this year?
The Prime Minister and President Xi have agreed that the UK and China should work together as respective hosts of the UNFCCC COP26 and CBD COP15 to reinforce and amplify those linkages between climate change and biodiversity loss and to achieve mutually supportive and ambitious outcomes at both summits. So we're working closely with our Chinese counterparts and with the UN Secretariats of the UNFCCC, the CBD and the CCD conventions to strengthen those links between these conventions to deliver the best outcomes for nature.
Virginia Crosby.
Question 12, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I've so far engaged with ministers and negotiators from over 80 countries and briefed all parties through the UN on a number of occasions. This, of course, includes discussions with representatives of countries including China, the US, the EU and India.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Secretary of State for his answer. In light of Germany's Coal Phase-Out Act, which states it will not end the use of coal-powered energy until 2038, how does the Minister intend to use COP26 to promote nuclear power, in particular at key UK sites like Wilvernerith on Anglesey, in order to meet the UK's net zero targets?
President.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is of course a consistent and strong champion of both the nuclear sector and the will for site in her constituency, and of course I commend her zeal. But as I've said to her previously, nuclear power is clearly has a role to play in our clean energy mix as we work towards net zero emissions by 2050, and she will know in the 10-point plan the Prime Minister set out, we are backing large nuclear as well as SMRs and AMRs.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I have engaged with hundreds of global and UK businesses through a combination of speaking at high-profile events and bilateral meetings, as well as through my COP26 Business Leaders Advisory Group. Businesses have a key role to play in tackling climate change, and I encourage them all to sign up to the Race to Zero campaign.
Well, Fletcher. For that answer. Derbyshire County Council recently launched a £2 million Green Entrepreneurs Fund for businesses that are interested in green energy and carbon reduction. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this is an excellent example of local government and businesses working together, and will he share my praise for the County Council leader, Barry Lewis, for his visionary leadership on this issue?
Speaker, I commend both my honourable friend and, of course, the leader of Derbyshire County Council, Barry Lewis, for championing this excellent initiative. And this is precisely the type of scheme we want to see, supporting businesses, supporting growth and jobs whilst cutting emissions.
David Johnson.
Question 14, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 14, 15 and 16 together. I want COP26 to be the most inclusive ever, and the voices of young people are vital to this process. That is why I've set up an international COP26 Civil Society and Youth Advisory Council, allowing for a regular dialogue with youth activists, NGOs, Indigenous peoples and faith groups as we plan for COP26.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a pile of letters on my desk from children at Gems Didcot and John Blandy primary schools who've written to me to tell me what they've learnt about climate change, what positive changes they saw in the environment during lockdown, and to give me their ideas of things they think the government should be doing. Can my right honourable friend tell me how children and young people will be able to feed into the preparations for COP26?
President.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for championing the views of young people in his constituency, and of course I pay tribute to the pupils at John Blandy and Gems Didcot primary schools for their enthusiasm for climate action. I'll be delighted to receive their letters, review their ideas, and through him I will respond in writing to his constituents.
Let's go to Laura Farris. Laura.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend and I both have the privilege of representing seats in Berkshire, where many young people are passionate about climate change and are active in local groups like the West Berkshire Climate Action Network. This is their first real opportunity to see UK leadership in action. Could my right honourable friend confirm to me how they can access the Youth Council that he just described and other mechanisms to feed their ideas into the COP later this year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for the work that she also does in promoting climate action. I'd be very happy to hear from young people and youth groups in her constituency. What I can tell her, though, is that we will be engaging further with schools in relation to COP26 to unleash the enthusiasm and energy of young people across the UK to tackle climate change.
Susan Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all have a stake in protecting our climate, particularly young adults in my constituency, who I hope will be the pioneers of change. As part of the UK-Italy COP26 partnership, what are the plans for the Youth for Climate 2021 Driving Ambition event to be held in Milan in September?
Mr. Speaker, from the 28th to the 30th of September, the Youth for Climate event will bring together 400 youth delegates from across the globe to discuss topics under a range of thematic areas, and the event will culminate in a declaration and discussion between the youth delegates and ministers attending the pre-COP26 event.
We now come to topicals for the COP President.
Mr. Speaker, if we are to protect our planet from the ravages of climate change, we must support developing countries to respond. But without adequate finance, the task ahead is well nigh impossible. That is why on the 31st of March, the UK presidency convened around 50 developing and donor countries and multilateral institutions to consider how we can get more and more timely public finance flowing to climate action. I'm very pleased that we've secured a range of commitments from the likes of the World Bank, the IMF and donor countries to move this vital work forward. It is our moral duty, Mr. Speaker, to protect the most vulnerable communities from a climate crisis that they have not caused.
Let's go to Debbie Abrahams. Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how does supporting a new Cumbrian coal mine, giving new licences for oil and gas exploration, scrapping the Greenhouse Homes grant and reducing incentives for electric vehicles reflect the government's stated commitment to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050? Or is this more dad-dancing rhetoric by the Prime Minister, unconvincing and uncoordinated?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raised a number of points. I think in previous answers I have set out the ambition that the UK has and the progress that we've made, but specifically when it comes to oil and gas licensing, the UK government is going to be introducing a new climate compatibility checkpoint before each future oil and gas licensing round to ensure that licences awarded are aligned with wider climate objectives, including net zero emissions by 2050.
Go to Shirley McCauley. Shirley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surfers Against Sewage in my constituency are ardent environmental campaigners, particularly on plastic pollution and water quality, and our environment is all the better for their work. The government has a key role to play on protecting the environment. So can my right honourable friend assure me that when the world gathers for COP26 in November, protecting and enhancing the environment, particularly for the people of Cornwall, is at the very top of their agenda?
Mr. Speaker, the COP26 Nature Campaign is driving ambitious international and domestic action to protect and enhance our environment, and this will be a high priority at COP26 in November. I commend the work that Surfers Against Sewage are doing on water pollution and water quality, which I hope to see firsthand when I visit Cornwall as part of the G7 summit in June. Protecting the ocean, including through nature-based solutions, provides multiple vitally important climate change adaptation and resilience benefits.
Secretary Edmonds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, the COP president wrote that the world is, and I quote, doing nowhere near enough to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, and he's right. Now, a green economic stimulus could make a huge difference to meeting the target. But while we have put it as the top item on the G7 agenda, the sum total of the Chancellor's measures here in the UK promised just £12 billion of green spending over a decade, and he's already cut £1 billion from that. Our investment is 60 times smaller than President Biden's green infrastructure plan. Isn't it a very significant challenge for COP26 that when it comes to a green stimulus, we're telling others to act, but not doing so ourselves?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman knows that we agree on many of these issues in terms of tackling climate change. But what I would say to him is that when it comes to government money, what we've also done is ensured that we leverage in private sector money. This isn't just about government money, it is also leveraging private sector money. And ultimately, this is about not just cutting emissions, but also creating jobs for constituents across the UK.
As he will know, as COP26 hosts, our actions face particular scrutiny, and I think he will know the international community is increasingly concerned, and not just on green recovery. The government calls on others to power past coal, but flirts with a new coal mine. It says to others adopt a net zero target, but is off track on ours. And it tells countries to support the world's poorest, but slashes aid spending. Rachel Kite, former Special Representative of the UN Secretary General, said this week about our record on climate, what the UK is doing is like dad dancing. They are very uncoordinated. Isn't it time the government gave up the dad dancing on climate and showed some consistent leadership?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know he himself is obviously a very good dancer and therefore is unlikely to take part in dad dancing. We should try it together at some point. Can I just say to him? Can I just say to him that, of course, every country, including the UK, needs to make more progress in terms of cutting emissions. He makes specific reference to coal. He will know that our energy mix when it comes to coal has gone from 40% in 2012 to less than 2% last year. And we have been leading the Powering Past Coal Alliance, where a large number of countries have now signed up. So we are making progress. Of course, there is more that we can do.
We now come to Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend tell the House what diplomatic steps he has taken to engage with international partners on preparation for COP26?
Mr. Speaker, we're working closely at many levels with international partners on preparations for COP26 and to accelerate climate ambition. The COP President-designate has met large numbers of governments. He is already out and about visiting many countries, 15 in the last few weeks, and briefing UN member states on a regular basis. And I am working with the most vulnerable countries to make sure that they are supported for their ambitions to meet their resilience challenges.
We have the final question from Hilary Byrne. Hilary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Converting UK homes to zero carbon heating will be a huge task. Does the COP President believe that heat pumps can adequately replace all gas boilers? And if there's a need for supplementary heating, what form does he think this should take?
Mr. Speaker, I refer the right honourable gentleman to the 10-point plan, which set out very clearly the progress that we want to make in terms of decarbonising buildings and homes as well. And of course, heat pumps will play a part. We've also set out in there our plans in terms of the use of hydrogen for home heating as well.
We now come to questions to the Prime Minister. And we start with Gagan Mahendra. Gagan.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I know colleagues across the House will wish to join me in paying tribute to our dear friend and colleague, Dame Cheryl Gillan, who sadly died last week. An MP for Chesham and Amersham for 29 years, she will be remembered for being a strong voice for her constituents, a brilliant campaigner, including her advocacy for autistic people and their families, and for being the first female Secretary of State for Wales. I also want to pay tribute to Baroness Shirley Williams, a pioneer for women in politics and in government, and to our former colleague Peter Ainsworth, who was passionate about his causes, especially the environment. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dame Cheryl represented her constituents with considerable effectiveness for nearly 29 years and is already sorely missed in this place, especially by many of the newer members, as she was so kind to us in our first months in this place. One of her passions was the protection of chalk streams, in particular the River Chess, which passes through my constituency of South West Hertfordshire. Many MPs are increasingly concerned about reports of partially treated sewage being released into our rivers, with knock-on health impacts for both humans and animals. Can my right honourable friend reassure this House that this government will actively protect our rivers and streams?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is entirely right to raise the concern that we fully share about sewage overflow from into rivers such as the Chess, and that's why we have set up the Storm Overflows Task Force to address the matter, working with the water industry regulators and environmental groups. And last month we announced legislation, plans for legislation to address this very issue.
Now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his remarks about Dame Cheryl Gillan, who I work with on a cross-party basis and remember with fondness, and Ian Gibson, who also passed away this week. Both commanded respect on all sides of this House and will be sadly missed. Can I also pay tribute to Shirley Williams? She was a great parliamentarian, a formidable minister and cabinet minister. She loved this House, the other place, and frankly anywhere where she could debate ideas and politics. For many years she was Labour's loss. Today she is Britain's loss, and my thoughts are with her family and loved ones. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister believe that the current lobbying rules are fit for purpose?
Mr. Speaker, I join the right honourable gentleman in what he said about Ian Gibson, and I indeed share the widespread concern about some of the stuff that we're reading at the moment, Mr. Speaker, and I know that the Cabinet Secretary shares my concern as well. I do think it is a good idea in principle that top civil servants should be able to engage with business and should have experience of the private sector. When I look at the accounts I'm reading today, it's not clear that those boundaries have been properly understood, and I've asked for a proper independent review of the arrangements that we have to be conducted by Nigel Boardman, and he will be reporting in June. And if he has any representations he wishes to make on that subject, he should do so to Mr. Boardman.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister is launching an inquiry. That inquiry isn't even looking at the lobbying rules. I'm not sure it's looking at very much at all, because every day there's further evidence of the sleaze that's now at the heart of this Conservative government. Let's just look, you shake your heads, let's just look at the latest scandal. A wealthy businessman, Lex Greensill, was hired as a senior advisor to David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. We've all seen the business card. After he left office, Cameron, became a paid lobbyist for Lex Greensill. Next thing we know, Cameron arranged access for Greensill with cabinet ministers and senior officials, and he lobbied for taxpayers' money on behalf of Greensill Capital. We also know the Chancellor pushed officials. We know the Health Secretary met Cameron and Greensill. We know that senior officials met Greensill Capital regularly. And now, even more unbelievably, we know the government's former head of procurement, no less, became a Greensill advisor while he was still a civil servant. Does the Prime Minister accept there's a revolving door, indeed an open door, between his Conservative government and paid lobbyists?
Mr. Speaker, this is a government and a party that has been consistently tough on lobbying, and indeed we introduced legislation saying that there should be no taxpayer-funded lobbying, that quangos should not be used to get involved with lobbying. We put in a register for lobbyists, and there's one party, Mr. Speaker, that actually voted to repeal the 2014 Lobbying Act, and that was the Labour Party in their historic 2019 election manifesto, which he is yet to repudiate, Mr. Speaker. They did so because they thought it was unfair and was restricting people's ability to make representations to politicians. I think that's absurd. Will he now say that it's absurd to repeal the 2014 Lobbying Act?
Mr. Speaker, he talks of the Lobbying Act. Who was it who introduced that legislation? David Cameron. Who was it who voted for the legislation? Half the Conservative front bench. We said it wouldn't be tough enough. And where did that legislation lead? 2 years later, David Cameron camping out in a Saudi desert with Lex Greensill having a cup of tea. I rest my case in relation to that legislation. Let me try another very simple question. Is the Prime Minister aware of any other government official who had commercial links with Greensill or any other lobbying role while working in government?
Mr. Speaker, if he has any such information, he should, of course, make it available to Mr. Boardman. That's the point of his. That's the point of his review. It's an independent review. It'll be coming to me by June. I'll be glad it will be played in the library of the House of Commons. I talk about lobbying, Mr. Speaker. He's being advised by Lord Mandelson of Global Counsel Limited. Perhaps in the interests of full transparency, so we can know where he's coming from, Lord Mandelson could be encouraged to disclose his other clients, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I haven't heard a defence that ridiculous since my last days in the Crown Court. It's called the shoplifter's defence. Everyone else is nicking stuff, so why can't I? Mr. Speaker, it never worked. I remind the Prime Minister, I not only prosecuted shoplifters, I prosecuted MPs over the MPs' expenses scandal. So I stand on my record. That line just isn't going to wash with me. It was a former Prime Minister, and I suspect now former lobbyist, who once said, "This isn't a minor issue with minor consequences. Government contracts potentially worth hundreds of billions of pounds are at stake." So can the Prime Minister now answer the question the Chancellor's been ducking for weeks? How was it that Greensill Capital, a company employing David Cameron, got the green light to give hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayer-backed loans?
Mr. Speaker, whilst he was prosecuting MPs, I was cutting crime in London by 23% and cutting the murder rate by 50%. And he asks about lobbying on behalf of Greensill, Mr. Speaker. And again, I don't wish to embarrass the right honourable gentleman, but he doesn't have far to look. There was one person asking for the Greensill Bank to be able to use the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, and that was the Shadow Defence Secretary, Mr. Speaker.
It gets weaker and weaker. It does take me back to my defence days in the Crown Court. It's just ridiculous. The Shadow Defence Secretary, it really wasn't a good point. If you think that's a good point, you've got real problems. Shadow Defence Secretary was speaking for his constituents and for local jobs. That is million miles away from being a paid lobbyist texting friends in government. The Prime Minister says there's going to be an inquiry, but the person he's appointed worked for the same law firm which lobbied to loosen lobbying laws. You couldn't make it up. What we need is to overhaul the whole broken system. This afternoon, Labour's motion calls for a proper parliamentary inquiry into this scandal. If the Prime Minister is so concerned about this, he should welcome the motion. After all, to quote David Cameron, his old school friend, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So will the Prime Minister vote with Labour today for a full, transparent, independent inquiry?
Mr. Speaker, I think he would have been better off supporting the Lobbying Act, and the Labour Party would have been better off not campaigning to get rid of it. It toughens up our laws, and Mr. Speaker, I think that his own proposal is simply to have, yet again, to have politicians marking their own homework. What the country wants, that's all it is. A committee of MPs to look at it. It won't do a blind bit of good. That's why we're having a proper independent review. If he has any representations or allegations to make about what has taken place, he should make them to the eminent lawyer who's been asked to do it. He'll be reporting to us by June.
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister should be voting with us, not blocking a proper inquiry. The Greensill scandal is just the tip of the iceberg. Dodgy contracts, privileged access, jobs for their mates. This is the return of Tory sleaze. Mr. Speaker, it's now so ingrained in this Conservative government, we don't need another Conservative Party appointee marking their own homework. Actually, Mr. Speaker, the more I listen to the Prime Minister, the more I think that Ted Hastings and AC12 are needed to get to the bottom of this one. Mr. Speaker, we know the Prime Minister will not act against sleaze, but this House can. So can I urge all members of this House to come together this afternoon to back Labour's motion and start to clean up the sleaze and cronyism that's at the heart of this Conservative government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that's why we're putting in an independent review. That's why we have tougher laws on lobbying. A great shame that Labour opposed them. Mr. Speaker, yes, we are getting on with rooting out bent coppers, Mr. Speaker. We're also appointing and hiring thousands more police officers, Mr. Speaker. We're fighting crime. We're fighting crime on the streets of our cities, whilst they opposed the police and crime bill, which would have put in tougher sentences for serious sexual and violent offenders. Absolutely. And they then encouraged people who went out and demonstrated attempted, Mr. Speaker, to kill the bill. We're getting on with protecting the public. That's absolutely correct, Mr. Speaker. We're getting on with protecting the public of this country from crime of all kinds. We're getting on with the job of running this country, of rolling out a vaccination programme.
Order. Prime Minister, I think we ought to at least try and address the question. Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a year this week since I had the privilege of starting to volunteer at Watford General Hospital, and over this time I've been fortunate and privileged to work along some inspirational and selfless volunteers. So as the nation reflects this week on the importance of schemes to support young people, may I ask the Prime Minister if he would meet with me to explore the creation of an NHS cadet scheme to pay tribute to those who've already volunteered over the past year and also create a lasting legacy for generations to come. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for what he's doing. I thank everybody at Watford General Hospital for the support they've given throughout the pandemic, and particularly, Mr. Speaker, the volunteers who play a massive part in our vaccination rollout programme. And I fully support the NHS cadet scheme, part of our work to establish a volunteering legacy for young people from the pandemic.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Morning time, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition on Dame Cheryl Gillan and of Shirley Williams? Mr. Speaker, the Scottish Government has passed landmark legislation embedding the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law. A real revolution in children's rights. Every party in the Scottish Parliament supported it, even the Scots Tories. It has been welcomed everywhere, except here in Westminster. Instead of supporting this new law, the UK Government is shamefully taking the Scottish Parliament to court in order to strike it down. Apparently, the only basis of the UK Government's legal case is that the law constrains Westminster powers. So, Prime Minister, can you do everyone a favour by explaining how protecting children's rights in Scotland threatens the Tory government in London?
Mr. Speaker, this is complete nonsense. The government of the United Kingdom ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child 30 years ago. We all support it. It is nothing to do with the rights of vulnerable children, which we all protect. This is simply an attempt by the SNP to stir up constitutional chaos and create another fictitious bone of contention between themselves and the rest of the country. If they really cared about the rights of the child, Mr. Speaker, they would do much more to improve education in Scotland, where they are so lamentably failing, Mr. Speaker.
Ian Blackford.
The rights of the child, an act passed by the Scottish Parliament, supported by every party, and his government is taking our Parliament, our government, to court. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing technical about this, and the Westminster government wants to strip away the rights of children in Scotland. This is a tale of two governments. We have an SNP Scottish government delivering the baby box, doubling the Scottish child payment and providing free school meals to every primary school child. At the same time, this Tory government is robbing children of their rights in Scotland. Quite simply, Mr. Speaker, the SNP Scottish government has and will continue to work to ensure Scotland is the best place for a child to grow up. This legal challenge threatens that. It is wrong and it is morally repugnant, Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister commit to withdrawing his legal challenge today? If not, we'll see you in court.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the best thing they can do, as I say, for the rights of the child in Scotland is to improve their shameful record on education and to tackle the issues that matter to the people of Scotland, to tackle the tax regime that they put in place, to do better on fighting crime and drug addiction in Scotland. They should be looking at the issues that really matter, in my view, to the people of Scotland. And instead, they're going into the elections next month, Mr. Speaker, yet again on a campaign to break up this country. That's all they can think of. Break up this country, call for a referendum, break up this country, destroy our country, and call a referendum in a way that I think is completely irresponsible at a very difficult time when we want to bounce back stronger together.
David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The A55 expressway is of huge importance to North Wales, linking the region to the main motorway network. It is also, as was noted in the recent interim report on the Union Connectivity Review, the principal freight artery for the port of Holyhead. The road is in desperate need of improvement and has been for many years. So will my right honourable friend confirm that the government will make it a priority to use its powers under the UK Internal Market Act to upgrade the road for the benefit of the people of North Wales?
Thank you. I thank my right honourable friend. He's completely right, and the Sir Peter Hendy has rightly identified the potential of the A55, and I think the best thing the people of Wales can do to guarantee these vital upgrades is to elect a Welsh Conservative government on May the 6th.
We now go to Vicky Foxcroft. Vicky, I understand you're going to sign. Can you speak and sign at the same time for all our benefits? Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if the Prime Minister doesn't understand, imagine how those who rely on British Sign Language feel at his press briefings. 2.6 million spent on the new press room, yet still no interpreter. What message does he think this sends to disabled people?
I'm grateful to the honourable lady and grateful for the way she has set out her question. I will revert to her as soon as I can.
Sarah Dines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is thanks to the sacrifice of the British people during lockdown and the great success of the vaccination programme that lots of small businesses across the whole country and in my constituency in Derbyshire Dales, like Brocklehurst, who supplied clothing to the Duke of Prince Philip, that they can remain open? Will he join with me in a campaign to shop local as we come out of lockdown?
I thank my honourable friend, and I can tell her that, yes, I certainly will encourage her and everybody else to shop local as we come out of lockdown, and as I very much hope that we will be able to do. And my right honourable friend, the Communities Secretary, has announced £830 million of funding from the Future High Streets Fund has been allocated to areas, including her own, in order to encourage that shopping that we all hope and want to see.
Ruth Catherine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I extend my condolences and those of my constituents to the Queen and to the royal family for their sad loss, and also to the families and colleagues of Cheryl Gillam and Shirley Williams. Will the Prime Minister tell this House when he last spoke to former Prime Minister David Cameron?
The honest truth, I cannot remember when I last spoke to Dave, but I can, if she wants to know whether I've had any contact with him about any of the matters that have been in the press, the answer is no.
Father of the House, St Peter Bottom.
Mr. Speaker, those who helped to develop, to test, to approve and manufacture the vaccines deserve our praise. Will my right honourable friend also recognise that the successful rollout of the vaccination programme has been based on the dedication of the NHS staff and the myriads of volunteers who made the process so easy for so many people?
My right honourable friend is completely right. This has been a colossal team effort. It has been led by the NHS with GPs very often doing the lion's share of the work, but they've been supported by the Army, by local council officials who have also been absolutely magnificent, and as colleagues have said earlier, by volunteers as well.
16 withdrawn, so we go to Dr. James Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The interim findings of Sir Peter Hendy's Union Connectivity Review are very much to be welcomed. He highlights the improvements that need to be made to the railways in North Wales linking up with Merseyside and Manchester, as well as the A55. These, of course, can help to level up the region. Will my right honourable friend confirm that the identified projects within Sir Peter Hendy's work in North Wales will receive a fair chunk of the £20 million of development funding as part of the agenda? And will he commit to implementing the findings of Sir Peter Hendy's final report when it's released in the summer?
I thank my honourable friend. We will look at what Sir Peter has to say. I think he's come up with some very interesting interim proposals, particularly about improving connectivity along the North Wales coastline, the routes into Merseyside, and on the A55. I repeat what I said to my right honourable friend earlier on. There is a great opportunity to do that if people will vote Conservative and vote for a Welsh Conservative government on May the 6th, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to Howell Williams. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2007, my friend Adam Price, then the member for Carmarthen East and Dynevor, proposed an elected representatives prohibition of deception bill. At this distance in time, it would be, well, unkind to quiz the Prime Minister on the detail, but he is seen as a big thinker. So today, perhaps he could tell the House what he thinks of the principle of that bill, which is that on important matters of public policy, politicians must not lie.
Well, I certainly agree. I have a high regard for the honourable gentleman, and indeed, I remember happy times with his colleague Adam Price. I don't remember the details of his bill, but I think, Mr. Speaker, we will all concur with the basic principle that he's just enunciated.
Esther Backbay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Former Police Inspector Kash Singh set up One Britain, One Nation, otherwise known as OBON, to bring together all communities, all classes, all ethnicities, races and religions to celebrate being British. OBON Day is held in June. However, next week, on April the 22nd, will be the launch of it at a school in Bradford. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Kash Singh for his fantastic initiative for all communities to come together in a common pride of being British? And will he also make a message for the launch next week?
When I say yes, I'll do my best, Mr. Speaker. But I fully support what she's doing, and I congratulate Kash Singh on his work. And it is incredible at this time, Mr. Speaker, there are people who want to split our country up rather than bring us together. That's what they want to do. I think it's an absolute tragedy that they still think like that. I think they're going to change, Mr. Speaker. But I wish everybody at OBON all the very best.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And contrary to the conclusions of the Race and Ethnic Disparity Report, institutional racism still exists. And 40 years since the Liverpool 8 uprisings, black communities continue to suffer racial injustice. And the report downplays the structural inequalities that still exist. The Resolution Foundation announced today that unemployment rate for young black people rose by 35% compared to 13% for their white counterparts. Can the Prime Minister confirm the allegations that Downing Street redrafted the report to change the narrative, and does he agree with me that this report should now be withdrawn? Thank you.
Well, I thank the honourable lady, but actually, when you look at the report and read it in detail, there's not everything that this government is going to agree with. Of course not. There are some interesting observations, some interesting ways of looking at things, and we will be responding in due course. But what we say is that nobody should be in any doubt as to the reality of racism, to the reality of the struggle that too many people face, and we are going to do everything we can to stamp it out, and particularly to help young black people get the jobs, get the education that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend will know, as we build back better, we need to inspire the next generation of scientists and engineers. Will he therefore agree to work with Engineering UK and Big Bang Digital to provide a short online introduction to this year's event to reinforce the message that a career in engineering is rewarding, it's creative and can transform the world around us for the better? And will he recognise the extraordinary contribution engineers have made and are making in our battle against COVID?
I thank my friend, because engineers have obviously been crucial, and scientists of all kind, in the fight against COVID. And this is the moment, Mr. Speaker, to become an engineer, or to work towards being an engineer. We're putting a huge £640 billion investment into the infrastructure of this country over the next few years. We're going to need skilled young people to be going into engineering. That's why we put in the T-levels. I congratulate my honourable friend on his initiative. I will do my best to support him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given his ancestry, the Prime Minister will be more than familiar with the phrase, "a fish rots from the head down." It is a Turkish proverb. Put simply, since he became the Prime Minister, the sound of Big Ben's bungs has been replaced by the cash-till sound of big donor bungs. There's been a threefold increase in bungs from property developers. Last summer, we had the case of Richard Desmond and the Community Secretary. More recently, we've had ministers dishing the dosh between constituencies, and the Health Secretary handing or involved in a contract with his pub landlord for £30 million worth of PPE. Now we have a Chancellor and Health Secretary that have sought to grease the wheels of involvement with Greensill and David Cameron. What does this say about the Prime Minister's leadership of his government?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid he is simply wrong in what he says, and particularly about what he says about the Chancellor, my honourable friend, the Chancellor, and the Health Secretary. And I don't believe that he should have spoken in those terms, Mr. Speaker. But what I will say is that there was one party in this place that brought in tough rules on lobbying, and there's another party that campaigned at the last election to get rid of those rules because of their relationship with the trades unions, Mr. Speaker, because they wanted them to continue in the obscure, opaque way that they were being run, and because they wanted people to be able to continue to lobby parliamentarians in the way that they always did. Look at their Labour manifesto of 2019, Mr. Speaker. If he repudiates it now, why don't go ahead and do so?
Final question from Gareth Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last few months, a number of my constituents have taken to the streets to help tackle the problem of littering, and I pay particular tribute to those constituents in Colsterworth who I met with recently. Will the Prime Minister join me in backing the Grantham Journal's Spring Clean campaign, and can he assure my constituents the government are doing all it can to help tackle littering?
Prime Minister.
I share, Mr. Speaker, his indignation about litter. I do think it's one of the things on which the whole of the country, and I hope the whole of the House, is united. That's why we're doing the Respect the Outdoors campaign to encourage people to follow the countryside code, to pick up their litter. Obviously, a lot of people are meeting outdoors at the moment, Mr. Speaker, because of the pandemic. They must obey the basic laws of respect for other people, pick up their litter. We're putting money into new litter bins, and yes, Mr. Speaker, we are increasing fines on the spot, fines for littering. I know that there will be many libertarians in this place who think that's unfair and draconian. Personally, Mr. Speaker, I think it's the right thing to do. I abhor litter, and I urge anybody who sees anybody throwing away a crisp packet to tick them off and tell them to pick it up, Mr. Speaker.
I am now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable necessary arrangements to be made for the next business. Order.